Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Survival Guide. My name is Mage, and today we're discussing the Kraken. So what is the Fantasy Survival Guide? This is sort of an essay project I've been working on the past few months, where I research fantasy creatures, objects, or concepts, and write them down on how best to fight them or survive them. The last video I did on this channel was the Griffin, but I also have quite a few channels on my other channel called Mage the Griffin, where I do a lot of historical European martial arts, fencing, sword fighting, as well as general adventures. I've got a few more videos coming out and already released on there, so feel free to check it out. Anyway, for this one, we are going to be discussing the Kraken. The Kraken is a large mythical sea beast that mostly focused on Norway. I didn't expect too much knowledge on it to make this too much of an essay, but I found a really incredible book by Henri Coupin, the Bishop of Norway. He set upon himself in 1752 to make a natural history of Norway, went around, did a lot of research, and made this into the whole book. Most of the book is mostly about the history of Norway. Imagine that. But he does give a few pages to various sea creatures, Kraken, mermaids, and a few others. This was a goldmine of research for me, as he had a lot of research, references to local fishermen, and a lot of interesting stories that he put into his book. So what is the Kraken? It's best described as an incredibly large sea monster, classically tentacled like a squid or octopus. Coupin did describe it as a polyp or starfish. I'm going to go back to that later. The Kraken went by a few names: Kraken, Kraxen, Krabben, anchor, and a few others. I'm going to get into this later, but the actual size and body of an adult Kraken has never been seen, always hidden beneath the waves. Coupin described the frustration of this. The adult Krakens are noted by Coupin to be above an Old English mile, which is larger than our modern miles. This is an incredible size. I'm not entirely sure if he means the body of the Kraken is this large, or the tentacles reach out this far. I'm more inclined to believe the latter because that is more believable. Reading Coupin's exact description, he describes the Kraken as a polyp or starfish-like, being circular with arms spreading out like starways. Though this could mean to be an octopus. The Kraken has a multitude of long arms that stretch out some distance, apparently strong enough to hold a medium-sized ship still, according to some stories. Bizarrely, there were also tales of these tentacles being dexterous enough to reach out and steal goods, crates, and supplies from docks along the coast or boats at sea. We can see in the modern day that octopuses are quite intelligent and very dexterous, being able to jaws lids even from the inside. I'm not entirely sure if the Kraken could be this fine, but on a scale, it probably would be similar. I didn't find much mention of the eyes or ocular sets of the Kraken. I'd imagine there'd be at least 2, though there could be more. At the center of the base of all its tentacles will be a massive mouth, a large beak, similar to a parrot or other likewise bird. We can see a good example with modern-day octopuses and squids of the same type, having a similar beak. This would be incredibly large on the Kraken, have an incredible biting force to be able to sever a man's arm or a poor arm's shaft. Now, what would the Kraken's behaviors be? Coupin refers to quite a few local fishermen who all said a very similar story. To abbreviate Coupin's words, on hot summer days when the fishermen row several miles to fish in the Norwegian Sea, they would expect to find a depth of 80 to 100 fathoms in the ocean. This would be about 160 to 200 yards with their cast lines. And that's when they knew the Kraken was beneath. What I did not expect, however, was this was a benefit to the fishermen. Apparently, whenever the fishermen found this beneath, there would be a huge abundance of fish beneath them. The artificial shallows made by the Kraken's living landmass, the size apparently being able to cover 20 plus fishing boats, this would attract a multitude of fish that the sailors and fishermen would capitalize on by catching them as many as they could. Their boats would be filled at the end of this journey, a lot of them said. Now the sailors do note that the Kraken tended to create and emit a very peculiar scent that attracted the fish to it. Later in the line, Coupin did sort of explain this phenomenon. The Kraken apparently would eat and gorge itself for a period of time and then disappear, either hibernating or disappearing in the ocean for a large amount of time. For several months apparently, until it came back to the surface to feed. It would store up all its excrement and waste during this period, and when it came to feed, it would release all this waste and essentially poop. This nutrient-rich excrement was what attracted the fish, causing them to come eat, and by thing, the Kraken would eat as well. Regardless of all these benefits that the fishermen exploited, they did have to be wary. They were always careful to observe the depth of the sea, as if it got more shallow, this indicated the Kraken was rising to the surface. By their own account, they had to row as fast away as possible to avoid being caught by the Kraken, either by its landmass or its tentacles. Additionally, even afterwards, the flood of water and the drag of the sea when the creature submerged could pull close boats down as well, drowning the crew. Now, the full size of the Kraken is a very interesting topic. The full body of the Kraken was never really mentioned or seen in its entirety, usually hiding beneath the surface of the water. Coupin did describe one particular instance of a young Kraken they managed to get it stuck high up on a Norwegian river far inland. Apparently got stuck and entangled on various things and trees along the sidelines of the river and rotted for several days before it was found. This is the majority where the description of the Kraken comes from. Now, during my research, I looked at quite a few papers and stuff like that. And while there are various sea monsters throughout legend, Kerberos from the Greek legend, sea monsters, sea serpents, and such, the Kraken is pretty much localized to Norway. And that was a very interesting thing for me, at least in my research. Giant squids have been all around, and they are a real thing in real life too. But what makes the Norwegian Sea very interesting is it's the only one without a continental shelf. What this means is it's very deep close to the coast, far deeper than any comparable sea. Such a large creature as the Kraken, even if there's multiple one, we need a lot of space, and so this would be a perfect ground for it to be. This is purely conjecture at my point, but this seems like this is a prime spot for the Kraken. The Kraken would most likely be in the deep ocean as well, and this is probably where a lot of the stories outside of Norway are come from. But being so close to the coast, there's a higher chance of probability of the Kraken being seen. Most likely that's where most of the information comes from Norway. This is entirely conjecture at this point. I might be totally wrong. I may not have looked far enough in. It's just a very interesting idea and point that I found when researching for this essay, so take that as you will. Now, even with Papadan's book, the history of the Kraken is not entirely that detailed. So I'm going to move on to how it would fight and how would you survive against it. Detailing how to fight the Kraken is actually a very interesting thing. It's a lot different than all my other essays. Since the Kraken is such an incredibly large creature, a single adventurer or even a small group fighting a Kraken by themselves is entirely unfeasible. Krakens have a tendency in legends to pull down and grapple ships, stretching their leather-high tentacles around the sea vessels, masts, and boards, and wrenching the ship and crew to the seafloor. These tentacles will also have massive suckers, either at the end or along the edge, depending on what type it is. These have such an incredibly powerful suction force, either adhering to skin or just plain off ripping off flesh. Now, the biggest defensive strength of the Kraken would be the depths of the ocean. The wisest tactic of the creature would be to retreat beneath the waves and stretch its tentacles out to wrench prey from the vessel or either just drag the vessel down. I cannot state how much distance is such an important thing in a fight, whether with a creature or with another fencer. Like I said on my second channel, I do fence quite a lot with historical weapons. One of the main things I do is just stay out of the range of my opponent's weapon. If your opponent's blade can't reach you, you're entirely safe. This philosophy definitely applies to the Kraken as well, and maybe to the crew members, but we'll see about that later. Now, like I did before, a single person fighting the Kraken is just entirely unrealistic. Unless you're some sort of superhuman, Percy Jackson, or any other sort of demigod, the best way I can think of to fight a griffin is actually to be a team effort. This being a group, either 3, 5 to 6, or a whole ship vessel crew. I split this discussion into sort of 3 sections. A small group, 2 to 3 people, a larger, 5 to 6, or an entire sailing vessel of quite a few dozens of crew members. On the smallest level, this would be a team versus a single tentacle. Fighting the entire Kraken, even with 2 to 3 people, is still going to be incredibly difficult. However, if you sort of make it manageable of fighting a single tentacle, this could be done. How I'm thinking this work is where 1 or 2 of the members hold down the tentacle, keeping it firm, while the other 1 or 2 have either a falchion, messer, or maybe a hatchet or an axe to go and cleave into the creature, separating it from the main body. I chose only single-hand weapons like the falchion and the axe, since space on a vessel is very limited. A smaller weapon is far more convenient on a day-to-day basis while doing work. Something larger like a longsword, halberd, or any sort of polearm would be entirely inconceivable on such a large vessel, unless it was specifically designed to hunt a Kraken. The crew members would essentially sever the tentacles, cleaving them from the body. This would be the best an individual or group could do. I'll get into it more later, but if you're like part of a larger crew, you can have multiple teams, like 3 or 4 of these 3-person teams, each of them taking on a single tentacle, working together to take down the Kraken. On a larger group level, I'd say 5 to 6, tactics would change. If you're in the age of gunpowder, a large group could facilitate a firing line with muskets, or at least get a few cannons going. I did some research into cannons. An experienced wartime sailor would be used to aiming for ship masts or structures. So aiming at long, grasping tentacles, roughly the same size as a ship mast, would only be slightly more difficult for such a person. Example ammos would be chain shot, shrapnel case shot, or just normal cannonballs. Chain shot is essentially a cannonball cut in half with a chain in between. This is incredibly effective at ripping through sails or tearing through ship masts. It was also incredibly debilitating and demoralizing for a crew if one of the crew members got hit by this. Just lower half just gone. Shrapnel case shot is sort of like Shrapnel or K-shot would either be like modern-day buckshot or more like an explosive that would land and then explode above the crew members' heads, sending shrapnel or small little pellets everywhere. This was incredibly destructive for the ship or for the crew members aboard. Any of these ammos would definitely do a lot of damage to the Kraken, tearing through its flesh or just outright mortally wounding the creature. Up on the deck, you could also use swivel guns, essentially smaller cannons mounted on mounts. These were quite agile, being able to angle and hit targets due to its maneuverability. Instead of aiming for the tentacles, perhaps some clever or just lucky sailors could aim below the waterline and hit the body of the creature if it was close enough. If you happen to not have any gunpowder or any so, I'd imagine bows, arrows, any sort of crossbows would also work for doing damage, just not as well. Finally, on a vessel level, creature versus sailing ship. How would a full-size crew take on a Kraken? I imagine this would be a sort of a larger sailing ship or maybe even a galleon. Like I said before, all the aforementioned methods would still apply, just as smaller teams. Smaller teams going after tentacles, some cannon crews, some musket lines, all of them working together against a common enemy. The captain or maybe a dedicated combat leader would delegate tasks. One group fires cannons, one moves the grasping tentacles, so and so. Lastly, depending on the size difference, if it's a large enough vessel, they could actually harpoon the creature. During the time of Papadan, there was a lot of whale hunting, and a lot of crew and sailors had a lot of experience harpooning and hunting down large creatures like whales. So a Kraken will not be too much different. If this worked and the sail was strong enough, they could either harpoon the creature and drag it, exposing it and shooting it with its cannons, or beach it along reefs, corals, or any sort of shallows. I don't really see how any way a single adventurer or even a small group could take a Kraken by themselves. The only thing I could think of is during sailing battles, sometimes crews or just navies would take broken or dying ships, fill them with gunpowder, set them on fire, and push them off, essentially doing a sort of ye olde kamikaze with a broken sailing vessel. This could work if you have multiple boats. You would just lose the boat and all crew on top. I actually found a lot more information about the Kraken than I intended, and finding out the Norwegian Sea is very unique in its depth was quite interesting to me. If you're interested in more essays, I do have the channel right here. I also have a War Anvil website with all the content detailed in this posted there as well. If you're interested in sword fighting or general adventures, check out Mage the Griffin here. Well, I do a lot of fencing and just have a lot of fun. I got a new toy this past week, an English billhook, which is an incredibly beautiful and devastating weapon. I had a lot of fun fighting with it, so you can check that video here. Anyway, thank you all for watching this essay. Adios.